What's the worst experience you've had because your parents forced you to? My mother, in the 1960s, was reading natural lifestyle magazines. She decided she'd try to make her children immune to poison ivy. So she made us eat poison ivy sandwiches. No, just swallow. My 5-year-old sister almost died from a swollen throat. Hospital, shots, IVs. The doctor was terrified that anyone could be so crazy. My father was so angry he couldn't talk to her. My sister and I are still allergic to poison ivy. My mother worried that I didn't have any friends bigger than I did. If I didn't have a playdate on the weekend, she'd make me call classmates I didn't get along with. And 9 times out of 10, they'd say they were busy. Some would even come up to me at school on Monday and ask, "Why the hell did you call me?" My grandmother was consumed by cancer in one summer. By the end, the disease had spread to her lungs, bones, and brain. She was completely bald, a skeleton covered in skin. She weighed 85 pounds. She was nearly paralyzed with pain and unable to move on her own. There was nothing that could be done except for painkillers. Due to brain damage, she gradually lost the ability to communicate normally and would scream and cry like a newborn when she needed something. Sometimes she forgot who she was or where she was and would simply scream incoherently in fear. My mother and aunt cared for her as best they could. My mother couldn't find anyone to look after me during the summer, so I spent every day, from morning until night, in the living room, watching my grandmother die and turn into a shell of a person. Most of the time, she didn't know who we were and called me the one who won't shut up when she could speak. I was there when she took her last breath at 2 a.m. and when the undertakers arrived to remove her body from the house. I was 7. I would even say I am traumatized by it. Every time I mention it to my parents, they brush it off. It's one of the reasons why I personally agree with medical assistance in dying. I don't want my family to witness my end. It was the worst experience my family put me through. Why did they make you stay in the living room all the time? You were 7. Surely you could have been in your room doing normal kid things. This was my grandmother's house, not mine. The house is tiny, and there is nowhere to go except the living room and the kitchen, and hanging out in my grandparents' bedroom was inappropriate. My mother sometimes tried to send me outside, but there were no children there. The village, and I was not allowed to go anywhere since the highway was nearby. I've asked my mum many times why she couldn't find someone to watch me, a sitter or a friend. She always shrugs and says, "You should have been with your family. I really shouldn't have been there. At least not to this degree of involvement. I'm terrified of heights. I can barely stand on a chair to change a light bulb without shaking." When I was about 10, a friend invited me to 6FL. That, if you haven't heard, is an amusement park, mostly with roller coasters. I declined at first, but her father was supposed to be the one driving, and he insisted she take her friend and wouldn't take no for an answer. Her parents were divorced, and her father was the ultra-rich type who buys children's affections. They rode for hours, and my friend's father apparently got tired of me not having fun. I didn't say that because I refused to ride the rides. He dragged me into line for some crazy ride where your legs dangle and you flip upside down and all that. I tried to tell him I didn't want to, but he just ignored me. At one point, I started crying. I was so scared. I kept repeating, "I don't want to, please don't make me," and he was indifferent to my pleas. Luckily, some teenage employee in an orange vest put me in front of the counter. "You have to be at least this tall," and he decided I was too short to ride. In fact, I was tall enough, but the guy saw that I was panicking and helped me out. He threatened to kick all 3 of us out of the park if my friend's dad didn't leave me alone. My mum made me hang out with her friend's son, who has very severe autism. She said she would babysit him while my friend was at work, but in reality, she was just dumping the responsibility on me. I had to change him and feed him, even though he was an extremely picky eater. I was 10, he was 14. She yelled at me if he made a mess or had a tantrum, as if I could control it. A friend paid her $250 a week, and all I got was headaches and bruises. My mother took out her anger at my father on me, exposing me to all his allergies after their breakup. When I complained of symptoms similar to those he was treating with an allergist, she would yell, "You don't have any allergies." I couldn't really object because she never took me to a doctor for an examination. And so, after a while, their separation turned into divorce. I moved in with my father and finally got medical help. It turned out that I really did need prescription medications and allergy shots. And then, in my late teens, The allergies worsened and became life-threatening. Now I'll have to follow a strict diet for the rest of my life because there are no clinical trials for the treatment of my specific allergy. It's impossible to prove a direct cause and effect, but allergies are known to worsen with repeated, uncontrolled exposure. So it's entirely possible that my mother made things this bad. Incidentally, she was mixing allergens into my father's food behind his back. And I'm pretty sure she did the same to me when I visited her after I was prescribed proper treatment. It's a dark story why she did it, but the point is, she can't be trusted. That's one of the reasons I stopped talking to her. If there's a silver lining, it's that this experience taught me to stand up for myself when ignorant people try to dispute the opinions of qualified doctors. It's incredibly embarrassing to say this, but damn, I had terrible acne as a child. It was an early symptom of polycystic ovary syndrome, and my mum took me to the doctor for a checkup. But before she did, she asked to speak to the doctor alone, and I overheard her tell him she was ashamed to be seen in public with me because of my terrible acne. I was 11, and I was already dying of shame about my appearance. And hearing that from my mum, who has always been and remains incredibly beautiful, completely destroyed me. She tricked me into going to the doctor for medication without even talking to me about it. And then it turned out she was just embarrassed because of me. Yes, I overheard their conversation, but it broke my heart, especially when you endure ridicule at school every day and then hear the worst from the person who is supposed to support you. Unfortunately, my mother and I are no longer close. My acne cleared up, and I received treatment for my dermatitis. Although my mother didn't seem to care at all, it was just my appearance, and I moved on with my life. The sad thing is that I'm now the main breadwinner in the family and have been paying their mortgage for several years, even though we don't communicate. I love my parents and want everything to be well for them, but my mother made my teenage years hell, instilling in me that I was disgusting. Yes, I did improve later, and she even told me so herself, but it was too late. She should have been there when I was being bullied by my peers, not telling doctors she hated going out with me and tricking me into appointments under the guise of checkups. She could have simply said she was worried about my skin and wanted to help. I would have been fine with that, but instead, she hid her disgust for me. It was horrible. When I was a teenager, my mother thought I would make a great model because I was tall and thin. She dragged me to a fashion agency once a week for a whole year. I never made any money there and experienced several unpleasant and stressful situations where I was yelled at and told I had to get thinner and thinner. I ended up weighing 110 pounds at 6'1". I hate my mother for it, but I know it's one of the reasons I developed depression. When I was a teenager, I began to realize it wasn't normal for parents to spank their children or control every aspect of their lives, and I started snapping. My mum forced me into therapy, which was really just meetings with a friend of hers from church who lectured me about my rebellious spirit. I later found out that despite the promise of confidentiality, she met with my mum after the sessions and told her everything I said. 20 years later, I still have a ton of problems, but I can't bring myself to go to therapy. How ironic. My mum made me afraid of the only thing that could undo the damage she did. My dad loves soccer, he loves it. He gets up at 7 o'clock a.m. to watch teams from his country play almost every day during the season. My dad made it a point for his son to play soccer, but I was terrible at it. I hated soccer. He gave me extra lessons. He played in college, but I was still terrible. Everyone knew I was bad. I spent 6 hours a week from 2nd to 7th grade being told I was no good. Finally, I was old enough to just stop walking. Instead of going to the soccer field after school, I just walked home. That was a couple of decades ago. My parents now. Yeah, it was hard, but you hated them. The thing is, there were other sports I actually liked. Hockey was too expensive. Taekwondo was a waste of time. Baseball was too much fuss. Another thing, my parents didn't force either my brother or sister to play football, so they have no idea what my childhood was like. They had a lot more free time and could do what they really wanted. My mum forced me to go to prom. I went with a group of friends, but everyone was in pairs, so I was basically the third wheel at prom. We showed up. Everyone left and ignored me. I texted my mum and asked her to pick me up, but she said I should stay to have fun. Like being forced to hang out at a party for 2 hours is fun. So I was alone the whole evening, completely miserable until our group decided to leave. My best friend's boyfriend was driving. We left the hall where the party was, and I went to get my coat and bag. I turned around and they were gone. I called my best friend, and she said, "Wait, you're not in the car with us? I thought you were right behind us." They drove off without me and didn't even notice. I came home, told my mum, and she just said, "Well, that's a shame." So, yeah, prom was one of the worst days of my life so far. When I was 8, my mother made me walk with a broken foot for over a week because she thought I was lying about the pain. When the doctor showed us the x-rays, she yelled at him and called him a liar. I had braces twice, and it was pretty horrible. My parents couldn't afford orthodontic treatment until I was a teenager. So, when I was a kid, my mother would sit me in front of the TV and force me to press on my 2 front teeth with a spatula because I had an overbite. If you're thinking, that's so stupid, she also taught as a dental assistant at the university. Now she and her husband have their own practice. My mother forced me to participate in a sailing regatta, even though the forecast warned of a storm. I was 9. The storm sank 2 yachts, and another was later found in a tree. I hoped for help from the lifeboats, but they were only thinking about themselves. Eventually, I made it to shore with a bent mast. They had to carry me from the shore. I was exhausted. It later turned out that my life jacket was faulty, and if I had ended up in the water, I would have sunk like a stone. My uncle drowned at sea because of the same storm. Oh, yeah, that was a personal trauma for me too, when I almost drowned in Gris. But no one forced me. I stupidly went there myself, going to an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with my dad. I was about 6, old enough to understand what was going on, but not old enough to be let into a room. So I had to sit quietly alone in the cold, dark hallway outside the meeting. I wasn't given any books or toys, so my only entertainment was listening to what was said at the meeting. And you could hear everything perfectly well through the paper-thin walls. My mother was good to me as a child, but the older I got, the harsher she became. She has a very distorted perception of the world, that's for sure. Not to mention that she's very obese. Well, I weigh about 250 pounds, and she's somewhere around 300 pounds. But she still eats fast food, no attempts to lose weight. Probably the worst thing I ever experienced was being kicked out in the middle of winter, simply because I didn't clean my room. My mother put all my things on the steps. Women's shelters didn't take me, and there weren't many of them anyway. I scraped together enough money for a few nights in a cheap hotel nearby and enough food from the supermarket to survive. It was terrible. I cried myself to sleep the first night, and then little by little I began to find solace in living alone. It was like having my own little apartment, just a bedroom and a bathroom. Then my mother forced me to come back with 2 emails telling me how much she loved me, and I fell for it. Because I had nowhere else to go, and the hotel room had taken all my money, I would have ended up a fat girl on the streets. And there was another time when she made me work in the bitter cold. And even with several layers of coats and my fat, I was still frozen to the bone. She wouldn't let me go back inside, even for a short break. Now I'm terrified of the cold and being left out in the cold. My father forced me to play baseball when I was 8 years old. I think he assumed I should or would want to play because I really liked this baseball movie back then. I was terrified of my father, so I knew better than to say I didn't want to play. I was the only kid who was afraid of the sword every time I went out to bat. I flinched and jumped away from every pitch. It was truly sad and pathetic. My dad yelled obscenities at me the whole way home after every game. One day, he decided to coach me himself and tried to get me to stop being afraid of the sword. But when I couldn't overcome my fear, he went berserk and started throwing baseball swords at me. It was terrifying. Fuck you, Dad. I was looking forward to my 13th birthday, and it fell on a Saturday. That day, I woke up to find out that even though I was old enough to stay home alone, my parents had forced me to go to a college basketball game instead. It was a rivalry game. I tried to convince them to let me stay home, but I couldn't because our family needs to spend at least one weekend together. My parents knew full well that I hated basketball, like a typical teenager. I didn't like spending time with my family, but I also hated any kind of sporting spectacles. And I hated how my parents would get completely wasted at these games, behave shamefully, and then drive me and my younger brother and sister home drunk. It was terrifying. The trip to the basketball game itself would have been somewhat survivable if I hadn't also developed a horribly painful bacterial skin infection on my face that day, which I didn't know about at the time. I caught it after scrubbing my face dry with paper towels due to constant colds and sinus infections, which my parents dismissed as a hoax. Doctors later said it was most likely a result of a severe dust allergy. My parents barely noticed the infection, only saying it's just pimples or something. No one cared enough to take me to the doctor, and even though I asked to be left home last week, I was still forced to go to school with this mess on my face every day, where I was constantly teased. I ended up covering my nose with bandages as best I could, and at least the stupid teenagers left me alone. It was only a few days later that I finally got to the doctor and was diagnosed with impetigo. And on my birthday, the entire skin of my nose and cheeks was covered in crusts and looked disgusting. For a highly insecure 13-year-old girl, this was a disaster. And before that, I felt ugly. So on my perfect birthday, I would have just wanted to stay home alone and play computer games. That was entirely possible. Instead, I spent about 5 hours sitting in the corner near the stadium concessions, on the tiled floor, listening to my iPod and covering my face with my hands. That was far from the worst thing that happened to me. The worst was when my mother went on a drinking binge 2 Christmases in a row in the last few years, but that day was especially memorable for its cruelty. Even if it wasn't intentional, just the result of my parents' ignorance and neglect. The worst thing my father ever did to me was marry his second wife. She was a total bitch, just evil. She fought with my father because I came to stay with him because I had lice. No big deal, just buy some shampoo and comb your child's hair. But no. She made me sit in the bathroom for hours with mayonnaise on my head. Disgusting. I was a chubby girl, and I still am. She took me shopping with her daughter, and I was so excited about getting new clothes. We were walking through the store, and I stopped in the girls section, but she practically dragged me by the collar into the boys section so I could look for some boys' jeans, because they don't make clothes for girls in your size. I was 11 years old and wearing boyish cargo jeans, and my stepmother and her family basically told me I was a pig and something else. They lived on a farm, and one year they had pigs that they raised for slaughter. She took me to see the pigs and said I should feel right at home here. My father has a much better wife now, and he apologized to me for marrying that bitch. My mother wanted me to come home from college for the weekend, even though she didn't help me with tuition or other expenses, and offered to pay for the trip. I refused. Then she told me that my father was dying. He had been really sick for a long time and had suffered several strokes over the years. She said it was time to say goodbye and that I should come immediately. I came. I walked home and my father was in the kitchen making dinner. He said he was fine. He wasn't privy to my mother's lies. I was shocked. What the hell? Who would lie about your father dying? My mother. That's who. She distracted me, not letting me talk to my father, and announced that she had bought me new clothes and makeup, and I had to wear it all because her friends would suddenly stop by. I never wanted to wear anything she bought me, especially makeup, but she insisted, pressed, making my life miserable until I agreed, just so she would shut up. A married couple came in with their son. He was about my age. I didn't even really pay attention to him. I don't remember anything about him anymore. I'd already been in a relationship for a couple of years, and I was in love. I just endured the whole evening, completely stunned by my mother telling me my father was dying, just to drag me home. And I couldn't confront her about it right in front of the guests. I pulled away. I didn't care. I had no interest. And then the guy's parents said, "Well, you should talk, in case you're interested in each other." Yeah, that's when it all became crystal clear. I started acting like the most horrible woman with no ambition, no hygiene, no concept of decency, and no desire to be anyone's wife, and a whore too. In the end, they jumped up and quickly left. To this day, my mother claims she didn't set it up, and that was her second attempt. The first one dragged on for years, and ever since I was 16, she'd been bringing this guy over to dinner with us. She'd met him by chance in the hospital after one of my dad's strokes. Ironically, they'd mixed up the medications. He was 10 years older than me. His father had more than one wife. He turned out to be an abusive asshole. But he was a doctor, so what could go wrong? When I was in first grade, my grandmother was admitted to the hospital at night. My mum and dad went with her, and my brothers and I were looked after by others. My grandparents, they had to get us ready for school in the morning. My other grandmother, who was very stubborn by nature, helped us get dressed, and she was convinced that my boxer shorts were just shorts, even though I told her they were underwear. Long story short, she sent me to school in my boxers. Even though it was winter and we lived in Canada, it was a fun day. Well, that's all. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If so, be sure to like this video. Also, subscribe to our channel and watch our previous videos, which you can find here. Good luck!